Journey to Healing, Reaching Women with a Desperate Cry is an 8-week Zoom seminar in which Kamala and Winston help women to start living their best life by rediscovering the image of God in their life. Kamala, a licensed marriage and family therapist, joins her husband of 16 years, an ordained pastor, to marry the clinical and the spiritual. You will begin living your best life filled with love, joy, and peace. Register at kwministries.net for this life-changing seminar.
The thing about that too, the mistake that I make often is try to love Kamala the way I want to be loved. Now, you know that's not love. That's me doing something to get something. Let me say it again. When you try to love someone the way you receive love. So for example, if I hear some good news and I get excited, I get really, really excited. And so if somebody tells me good news, I'm gonna get excited. I'm gonna get excited with that. And then I get mad because they're not getting excited. But that's really selfish. That's not reaching the person where they need to be met, but rather reaching the person where I need to be met in hopes of getting something in return.
You know, we in the therapy world like to feel like we know a lot of stuff, right? And so we talk about all kinds of different concepts, and we've done it all along the way. But nothing that we talk about is new as it relates to the Word of God. Here we are talking about how God is coming to get us, how we get to be now physically, not just mentally, a part of something.
Yes, Lord.
And so this was a concept that Maslow talked about a long time ago, love and belonging. He had this great hierarchy of needs, and if you've got safety and security, you've got shelter, you've got all of those things, then once you have that secure foundation, then you can focus on love and belonging. But here it is that God is saying you already belong. You don't have to worry about love and belonging in the way that Maslow talked about it. But the interesting thing is, just in the same way that Maslow identified that love and belonging is something that we need to thrive as human beings, here's where we're saying to you that, yeah, we agree. We do need love and belonging to thrive as human beings. We do need love and belonging to be able to experience care and compassion and empathy and having a place in the world. We do need love and belonging to be part of community. And yes, we're
in the kingdom of God.
So if we're being honest, and I'm hoping we are, we have started by being honest and vulnerable ourselves.
Yes.
And that's kind of the point. If we're honest, all we want to do is be in control.
Yes.
That's all we want. We want to control our relationships. We want to control the outcome of things. We want to know what's coming next. We always want to be in control. The trouble with being in control and having a relationship with God is that the two don't go together. I can't be in control and you can't be in control at the same time.
That's right.
You ever done a tug of war? If we're both pulling, somebody has to win.
Yeah.
Somebody does.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about God is that he gives us choice.
Yeah.
So if I want to pull in my direction, he's going to let me. Am I going to be free of the consequences of my direction? No. but he's going to let me. So I want for us to pause and really think about how many ways am I trying to control people and situations in my life that I have no business trying to control.
But let me ask you a question. Where does this obsession with control come from? Why are we so obsessed with being in control?
Because we're afraid.
Because we're motivated by those three demons.
Fear.
Fear.
Shame.
Shame.
And guilt.
And guilt. Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Live with KW. Because if it's Monday night,
You're live with KW.
And Jay, but
however,
Pastor Gibson won't be with us on tonight. He is actually in a board meeting, and since I'm very familiar with those things, I am praying for him. No, he's having a wonderful board meeting. He just won't be able to be out in time to be with us on tonight. It's Monday.
Yes.
What are you celebrating?
We are celebrating something. But first, before we talk about what we're celebrating,
Yes,
we got to remind you who might be joining us for the first time about why we even celebrate on Mondays.
Yes.
So, in our culture, we have learned to associate Monday with the blues, Monday with dragging ourselves back to work, Monday with, oh no, let's just get through this day. But we're trying to revamp Mondays here at KW
Rewrite
Ministries.
Monday.
We are trying to rewrite our Mondays. We are trying to renegotiate those Mondays and make it a day of celebration. And not because we're trying to put on this facade. We're not trying to be fake. But we recognize that when we reframe our ideas about things, guess what? We feel differently. We feel better. So
regardless of how bad the day is, it doesn't mean you won't have a bad day.
No.
We want to find something to celebrate.
Exactly. We are creatures of habit in terms of always looking for the negative. We seek that.
Right.
So we've got to intentionally seek the positive.
So I think I know what you're celebrating.
What am I celebrating?
Tell me. I'll tell you if that's what I was thinking.
Nope. I want to hear it first.
No, you tell me.
Oh boy. Well, let's see. I am celebrating just family today.
Oh, whatever. I thought she was going to say she's celebrating the fact that I made her lunch today. I called her from work and said, hey, let's go on a lunch date, but come home. And I made her some good lunch. I thought, you know what?
Celebration.
You know what? I'm celebrating that. I'll celebrate that. I'll celebrate that.
It was implied. Because I couldn't have had that lunch without family.
That was good. That was good. And if I had said that, you would have said, yes, that's what I'm doing. That's why I didn't say anything. But what are you celebrating? Please tell us in the comments what you're celebrating. So we have some viewers that we didn't even know were watching.
Yep.
I met one this past Saturday. Mm-hmm. She visited my church, Sister Lynette Foster. I remember to give you a shout out, Sister Foster.
We are so glad you could be with us.
Thank you so very much. We know that Sister Remo is out there watching and others, but please comment, say something. We have some very important things that we're going to talk about tonight. Please join the conversation. We have some really two of my favorite people that's going to be joining our discussion on tonight. So please join the conversation. But in the meantime, please just tell us what you're celebrating so that we can say welcome and thank you very much for being here. So Kamala, outside of celebrating Mondays, what are we doing?
Well, Monday Night Live is about, one, having a conversation with like-minded individuals. Well, not necessarily like-minded, because we talk to everyone, right?
Right.
It's about life experiences, the things that impact us, the things that help us grow, the things that hurt us. It's about just having an authentic conversation. But not only is that wonderful, wonderful content a part of what we do, we also are here to encourage you to check out www.kwministries.net/shop. You might be asking why. Why should they check out the shop?
Because we have some sweet products there. We have devotionals. We have Kamala's brand new book. What's the name of your brand new book?
Journey to Healing: The Therapeutic Approach to Finding Who You Are Meant to Be. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more about yourself, join me on my journey as you journey on yours.
And then your other book is
Journey to Healing: 8 Coping Skills to Heal. Because we all need a little guidance.
And that one is like having your own therapist with you. Now, we would normally say to you, hey, head over to the store. We'll be there. Unfortunately, we're not there tonight. We're having technical issues. So hang out with us. And then after we're finished, go over to the show. Now, go over to the store. So listen, Kamala, I'm really, really excited about our guests on tonight. Yeah. Our guests, I can honestly say they're my friends. One is newer. One is an old friend. I'm excited to have, let's bring them in and then I'll introduce them one by one. I am excited to have our returning,
Sheriff MVP.
Sheriff is almost a co-host now. He gets co-host status. Sheriff Richardson, who serves as sheriff in the
DeSoto Parish.
In the DeSoto Parish.
Right here in Louisiana.
Right here in Louisiana. Recently returned as sheriff. And just an excellent person, somebody that loves the community. It doesn't hurt that he's a pastor. I told our other guest that he can't cuss because we got 2 pastors in the room tonight.
You're terrible.
You're gonna see that he's worse than me in a second. Just wait till he gets going. And then the other day, one of the things I love about Sheriff Richardson is when we sit down. So I popped into his office the other day. He didn't know I was coming. I was actually visiting someone. And I said, can I stop and say hi? He made me feel as though that was a planned meeting and we spent about a good 45 minutes talking. Yeah. And I know he had stuff to do, but that's just the kind of person he is.
And I think it shines out because in a couple of the last times that he was on, people also commented just in terms of conversation.
Remember, they were like,
we need more people.
Just
from an hour conversation.
Yep. Chief Childress is my old boss. We go way, way back to Valdosta, South Georgia. I volunteered for his department. He became our friends. Yes. He and his wife, one of the best teachers that there is in the world. His wife is way better than him. She is such a sweetheart. They have 3 children, and we just became family friends. I went to watch.
Is that where the accent? Is that where the accent comes from? It's Valdosta?
Valdosta, that's it.
I'm from Virginia, so actually I'm in Virginia right now, so that's great. So that's where it comes from.
You're right, Sheriff. You're right. Chief, remember that time when we watched the Super Bowl at your house and I went to sleep?
Yeah, I invited Winston to come. I'm a big football fan. I asked him to come to watch the Super Bowl with us, and what does he do? He dozes off, which I'm like, I've never seen somebody doze off at the Super Bowl.
He was gone.
There's a first time for everything.
I'm from Jamaica, man. We kick the ball. We don't throw it.
Right. Which I would imagine is pretty hard. Harder than the NFL. So.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Thank you all so much for being here with us on tonight. We started off laughing and talking because I just really love you guys. But we have a really, really serious topic that we're going to try and approach tonight. And Kamala, you're probably going to be more of a guest also tonight than a host, because we're going to need your expertise also. We want to talk about sexual abuse. as Sheriff and I sat in his office the other day, we spent the most of the 45 minutes that we, hey, Philetta, that we sat down and talked about sexual abuse. Sheriff has a background in working with the FBI on child abuse cases, and we talked. And as we talked, one of the things he pointed out were the effects of sexual abuse on victims later in life. And I could just tell the passion from his heart in that conversation. So let's talk about that. What does a predator look like?
That's one of the, as we discussed in our encounter in my office when you popped in the other day, which I always appreciate and enjoy. Having sometimes it's good to pause in your day and get off of the schedule just a little bit. But
in other words, I interrupted his day.
No, I do appreciate that. Sometimes, like I say, it's a positive thing to be able to slow down for a minute and have a conversation outside of the monotony of the day. And so, as we talked the other day, the thing that and I've worked, some pretty high profile cases that from doctors to lawyers to law enforcement to grandpa, the most unassuming coworkers, even things of that nature that goes against the grain of the things that particularly we were taught in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s of that predator view that we had of the guy in the van by the ballpark. That is now, I will always say, trust your intuition in those situations because that's always important. But that's not always the case. What we find is oftentimes you have someone that has the propensity or the attraction to young victims particularly, and they find a way to work in that arena of everyday access to those young victims. And it may not start with the intention of actually fulfilling whatever fantasy that they may have or whatever attraction that they have. But the moment they take the step to become closer or to put themselves in a situation with those that, that pique their interest, then that's one step closer to acting. And so as we talk about what they look like, it's very difficult to define that because it's often the most unsuspected person that you think. Now, many times as we delve off into even deeper to that, what you find is those that are closest to that person generally had some intuition or some notion that just something wasn't right. And so that is oftentimes where you start finding out about not just one victim, but a history of victims or a history of, where they may have tried something or tried to instigate a situation. And so it's, again, that's a very difficult thing to define, but it is one of those to where as a parent, particularly, it's kind of maybe not frustrating, but it keeps you particularly me as someone who knows all of those ins and outs, and other people that work in law enforcement that are exposed to those things quite often. It keeps you on such high alert with your own children. You're always on red. You're never even in yellow when you work in these kind of jobs. And but that's because you recognize that it's those people that have access. It's not there are those that do kidnappings and things like that, but that is a very minute percentage of those that actually commit those types of crimes.
Chief, understanding that this is not readily visible, understanding that this could be the pastor, this could be the neighbor, how do children protect themselves from predators?
Well, the sheriff is dead on correct. I mean, you can't predict who's going to be the offender. I mean, I just can't. I don't know, the cases I'm seeing, I think it's important for parents to develop a good communication with their kids. they got to be able to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you develop that rapport early on with your children, and then of course, and I certainly don't want to take anything from the school system. I think our school systems across the country has gotten a little bit better. I mean, everywhere I've been anyway. You've got counselors there now that are talking to kids and stuff like that. But I think the sheriff is correct. I don't want to say that I think there's still people out there that don't know the children that would certainly hurt them. And I think oftentimes we focus too much on that. Don't talk to strangers, stuff like that. But when you're talking about sexual assault, sexual abuse, and stuff, and things of that nature with a child, generally that's going to happen. I'm not saying all the time, but generally it's going to happen with folks that the kids develop some trust with. And I'm not talking about parents either necessarily, but to me, when we work these cases in Valdosta, is that parents need to develop a closer rapport with their kids and look at their kids and to get to know their children. I'm not saying they don't, but I think sometimes we with technology and stuff like that, we're moving too fast. We forget that stuff. And so being able to read your kids, something's not right here, and then start asking questions, and I think that's a big indicator.
Sheriff, sometimes when this happens at home, we tend, especially when you have a situation where the boyfriend or the stepdad or the girlfriend or stepmom is the abuser, because of security reasons, because of the partner tend not to believe the children, tend not to believe, and not all the time, but that happens, tend not to believe the child. What does a child do in a situation like that, where they're not being believed by the other parent, where they're not being believed by, where they're afraid that if they go and tell somebody at the church, they're not going to be believed? What does a child do then?
Well, and so ultimately what we would hope they would do would be tell somebody else they trusted. But as the chief was saying, you have to build, so there has to be some sort of bridge there to compensate for all of those different aspects. And so if it is a parent, well, then as he was talking about having the rapport with your parent, well, that bridge is broken. So you have to have another bridge. One of the things that we do locally is we've partnered with, and Kamala may be familiar with the Gingerbread House, because they do all of our forensic interviewing of children. So we've partnered with them in our school system, and they go in and they have a age appropriate conversation about what is appropriate, what is not. It's because particularly if it's happening in the household, or if you're talking about someone who has had a past, let's just say they're a victim of sexual abuse, then they're not generally comfortable talking about any of that. Most of the time, if they've not healed themselves or dealt with that, then they're so far from having that conversation specifically with their children. And so this is something that we've started doing here that allows another location, another trusted individual to talk to them, that lets them know what is okay, what isn't. Because that's oftentimes what you run into, particularly if it's, grandpa or uncle or something, is those children love the person that's doing this to them. Like they genuinely love that person and may not recognize it's wrong. And so you have to, address that in the best places, obviously in school where most children are. And so address that so that they know what's happening to them is not okay, and that they know how to deal with that. And so that's not necessarily a model that's happening across the country. I don't know that it's just widespread, but I think it is more now than ever. And I will tell you, as we spoke in my office, 25 years ago, when I started my career, we had these types of crimes come, we would get some reports, but law enforcement, working those cases is really a science. That's something you have to understand in its completeness, because you have to understand that it's oftentimes used in custody cases, and it's not valid. You know, and so somebody coaches a child. That's something very important to understand, because you arrest somebody and their life can be shattered based upon a lie. And so it's just as important to prove the truth, regardless of whether that truth exonerates somebody or makes them, you know, guilty of something. But how they work these crimes now is so much different than what it was just 25 years ago. And so we missed, there's no doubt in my mind, we missed the boat, and law enforcement in general was missing the boat just that short time ago. Now we have people who specialize in that. And that is something that we see, you know, a lot across the country. Your rural areas or your smaller agencies still are suffering from a lack of qualified people to work those crimes. But that's why we arrest so many more people today than we used to. And it's not because there's so many more crimes. I don't believe that. I believe we know how to handle those cases better now. And there's more avenues for kids to report.
You know,
Winston, let me add something to that. And I'm gonna toot the sheriff's horn here a little bit. I was told years ago by the FBI that they used to be the biggest game in town. They had all the specialization, all the equipment, stuff like that. I think folks like Sheriff Richardson's staff, and I'm seeing it across the country, I think they're catching up. And in fact, and I think in some cases they've surpassed the federal government when it comes to these type of investigations. He said it himself. He's using a local, you know, some people call it child advocacy center or child sexual assault center, and they provide, and they have trained people. It sounds like you have trained investigators too that specialize in this kind of stuff. I think it's important for people to understand, hey, listen, we really are a profession, and we're growing. We're getting better at this stuff. And you know, I would agree with the sheriff. We missed cases. We missed a lot of cases, you know, 25 years ago. There's no question about it. But now, and I think he's right. You've got to have, you know, when you have these, they call them, I guess, forensic examiners, child forensic examiners, that know how to talk to these kids, that know the right things to say. And then he has specialized detectives that work these cases too. Not everybody can do that. That takes a special person to be trained to do that. And but even in Valdosta, we used a child advocacy center. I think you know that, right around the corner from the police department. And I know we're not talking about tonight, but then you have these these family violence shelters for women and children who help them that too. And you're seeing that across the country. But I will say this, and Sheriff Richardson's correct, you don't see that everywhere. I'm pleased to hear you've got it in your jurisdiction, sir.
Yeah. You know, there was a question that was on my mind since we first started the conversation, and you both kind of spoke to it just now. But I was wondering to myself, you know, what do you think has shifted for us, maybe culturally, to where a couple of years ago, not that many years ago, in fact, we weren't hearing as much, even though it was happening, but we weren't hearing as much about this as now. So what's shifted?
Well, I'll go first if you don't mind, Sheriff. It's really it's social media, technology. I mean, you know, I'm not here to lecture about law enforcement. I happen to think they're doing a pretty good job across the country. I'm up in Virginia right now looking at an agency. I told Winston that earlier. But when you have social media, and you're seeing, you know, across the country, you know, these. And is sexual assault in children increasing? I think it is, but I also think awareness, like what you're doing now with technology. But when you get YouTube, these different social media outlets and stuff like that, that's a double-edged sword. Here's the other side of that sword. Now you have folks that have access to different applications, and they're taking advantage of these kids on a larger level. Sheriff?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. That's kind of one of the things that I specialized in when was back, you know, when cell phone forensics particularly were just becoming a thing. You know, that is also one of the double-edged swords, as he said. You know, it is access. You know, we see kids as young as 5 years old with a telephone in their hand nowadays because it's just what they do. But people, we've recognized on the large scale where you have those predators that are searching outside of just their immediate realm, that use those, and it's children's games and things of that nature to reach those kids. But we, what we have done, and it's all, our game is always a game of catch up. It's something has to be done. We have to realize there's a new tactic that's being used, and then we're having to play catch up. And so I would say that, for those who have actively, sought to stay caught up, the technology piece, the benefit for us is that there's not a lot of discussion when it comes to evidence that we find on those devices. And because it's so much more out there, it allows us to have that as evidence and be able to, again, you confront somebody with that kind of evidence, there's nothing really you can say. And if, I don't have to guess, did he talk to that child? I can prove he talked to that child. Did he exchange an image or request an image? Where that was just, he asked me to take a picture of me. Well, now I've proven that. And so the evidence side of things has come so much further, and our abilities, what we find is people, particularly those that are the distant predators, the ones that are using those technologies to reach your children, is they can't help themselves. Like they'll take a step, and then they can't help themselves but take that next step, and then that's generally where we become involved, because they've sent something or requested something, exposed themselves, not necessarily in a graphic way, but exposed what their intentions are, and that has certainly helped us to to be able to act on things where previously, if it was just he said this to me, we couldn't do anything with that.
Yeah, Kamala, I'm coming to ask you something. Chief, think about, for me, question I'm coming to with you after I ask Kamala is, how important is community policing in helping to prevent some of this? But before I ask you that, Mommy, Sheriff just said that they can't help themselves. What's going on there? What's going on in the mind? We have a 6-year-old son. Chief's daughter, yes, she's a senior now, but when we were in Valdosta, she was, still a little child. So we know, I couldn't dream of hurting a child in that way. What's going? And I know you're not. What's going on in the mind? What's happening? He said they can't help themselves.
Well, I mean, the question is, it is subjective in nature, right? Because there's not a one size fits all answer for it. But people develop compulsions for many different reasons, right? And so a compulsion to seek the affection of a minor is a compulsion like others. Like Sheriff said, it's not necessarily something that I can pull myself back from, because the way a compulsion works is that it starts with the rumination of the thoughts, right? It goes over and over in my mind. I may play with that thought some. I think about what's the feasibility of acting out on this thought. Maybe I'll think through all the consequences and potential things that could come up as a result of acting on that thought. But at some point, that rumination becomes so much that it's so difficult to not act on it, right? I hate to compare it to something trivial like this, right? But have you ever ruminated over having something that that's not good for you? Ice cream. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, guys, and please don't hear this as an oversimplification, because I'd hate for anybody to walk away with that feeling. But the same way that
the same things that's happening in the mind
compulsively comes back over and over and over and over again until I get to the point of I give in, right? But here's where it gets a little tricky. So I give into that thought. Maybe I reach out. Maybe I make that first connection. And it kind of, I get that reward. Like any other reward system, drugs, sex, alcohol, whatever the case might be, right? I get that dopamine rush. I get that feeling of, I've acted out on this compulsion, nothing has happened. This is why I think Sheriff and both Chief Childress and Sheriff can probably attest to this. This is why by the time typically you have identified a predator, so many acts have come before you're able to identify, because each time it's almost like I'm testing the water, right? So let's see what happens here. Nothing has happened. I get this reward. So now I'm more emboldened. What am I going to do the next time? I'm going to go a little bit further, and a little bit further. And so it's really a matter of feeding that compulsion. It gets to a place where the acts that I started with, almost like a substance, I start with this amount that no longer feeds my need. And so that need gets fed by a greater and greater desire and that greater acting out. Wow. So I hope that kind of explains it. Again, very subjective. Different people have this experience in different ways.
Right, and Winston and Kamala is correct. She could do a whole 8-hour session on why folks do these things. I mean, you're talking about a very broad overview. I think people should know that too. You asked me about community policing. Here's what I would tell you. I think when I go around the country and do these things, these inspections and stuff, and even in Valdosta, and I get these ideas from good people like Sheriff Richardson and other folks across the country. Community policing is where you're involving everybody in your community. The sheriff's office, law enforcement, per capita cannot be everywhere. It's impossible to solve crimes without the people, about the community coming and talking to you. Now, the only way that's going to happen, for example, Winston, you knew this, in Valdosta, we maintain about a 96% clearance rate on murders, homicides. We exceeded the national average on Part 1 crime clearance rates, and we would post those things. Well, anyway, but that was not just the credit of law enforcement. That was the credit of the community. In fact, someone told me one time when we were doing these community forums, and it caused a little bit of a stir, asked me, said, Chief, what can you do more to help stop my home from being burglarized? I can't do any more. You have to help myself. For example, if I lived in the sheriff's county, I got to help him too. It's impossible for law enforcement to be the single solution for crime. Ain't gonna happen. For example, when we talk about those homicide clearance rates, the majority of the time when we solved a homicide, somebody came forth. Now, I'm not taking anything from law enforcement who do a fantastic job across the country and work in these cases. Same thing with sexual assault. You got to have someone come tell you. Someone's got to come forth and work with you. And so to me, community policing, when I go look at it, I want to know, are they working with juveniles? Are they working with adults? What are they doing to help? And I'm not saying it's law enforcement's sole responsibility, but what's the community doing to help folks coming out of prison get a job? And we did that in Valdosta. Reduce recidivism rates. And then I think it's always overlooked, is getting the media, like we're doing tonight, getting the media on board with you to help spread that message. And when you're doing all four of those, in my opinion, you're doing true community policing. And the only way to solve these cases, especially the ones the more serious ones we're talking about tonight, is people have got to help the sheriff's office. There's no way around that. If you're not going to help them, it's going to continue. I can't make it any plainer than that.
Go ahead. Sheriff Richardson made a comment earlier when he was talking about the gingerbread house, as well as the importance of family involvement and knowing how to look for the signs and how to have conversations. And I'm just struck by how much a role education plays in this, because we can't often make the assumption that kids in homes are educated to even know the signs of what abuse is. It was said earlier, a majority of the time, and you guys let me know if I'm misquoting data here, but a majority of the time, children who are victimized by people that they know and people that they have relationships with, people who they have learned to love and don't necessarily understand that what is happening here is something abusive until they've learned that somewhere else. And then it becomes a surprise. Like,
Trigger.
oh my gosh,
This
I
happened
had
to
no
me.
idea that this thing was wrong until somebody says it. So just to, in kind of with what Chief Childress said, and it's all of us coming together and having these conversations, this education, and recognizing who and where the resources are found that can be helpful to us.
A lot
I
of
would
times,
I would tell you 9-1, and that's probably being conservative. 9-1, it's someone who has direct access to the child in those cases. And also, I would mention that one of the important reasons of doing it within the school system is what we often find is that in dysfunctional homes, in homes where you have, whether it be, just poverty, but poverty is obviously not just, that's by itself is not an indicator, but
right.
you may just have dysfunction, drug use, things of that nature, where there's a constant in and out of male figures, particularly in the home, is often, or at least more often, a place where you would find, there's just so much dysfunction that the child has no baseline without that baseline being set in the education platform at school. And so that's why it has become so important to put those types of things in that environment, is because it's not necessarily something they're getting. We often take for granted that every child lives in, and as a pastor, obviously, Chief Childress knows this, and you as a counselor probably deal with this, for years, trying to go back and help fix some of the things that has happened with the trauma. But we often lose connection with the reality that our homes where our kids come and they're safe, and they know what they're going to eat tonight, and they know somebody's going to get up and help them get their clothes for school, and they're going to be clean tomorrow. Like we take for granted that is the standard, and that is not the standard. And so that is why it's so important within the school to be present and help establish what's okay and what's not when it comes to abuse, particularly.
But again, we have folks in the school system. I mean, when I hear people say that law enforcement in the school systems are not doing a good job, that's just not true. We've gotten much better at our jobs, but I'm impressed with what I see across the country with folks like Sheriff Richardson and these child advocacy centers and these expertly trained detectives and investigators and counselors at schools. But again, we're going to have to, I think this country needs to rethink what we're doing with these kids. We've got to be parents and have conversations with these kids. It can't be just the responsibility of law enforcement and with ministers and with counselors. It has to start with parents. And he's right. I would agree with the sheriff. I'd say 9 out of 10 times that abuse has been taking place by someone they're close with.
They trust.
Doesn't mean you shouldn't, talk to your kids about stranger danger and things of that nature, but it's just unfortunate.
Sheriff, how do we prevent this? What are some practical things we can do in places like churches to prevent, because predators are going to show up at churches? I'll tell you a quick story. Chief, I was actually pastoring in Valdosta when I don't know what happened. They didn't tell us what happened, but I know something happened because it's the only time they bring out the lawyers. But they called us to a conference, and they had our lawyers come in, and they had our lawyers talk to us about predators and who a predator was. And as I watched the screen, because he showed a video, they described me down to a T. They described Winston Taylor to a T. You remember how I worked in Valdosta, Chief? the sleepovers, the visit the schools, they become friends with the parents. I drove home and I said to my wife,
you thought they were talking about you.
I know I didn't know, but I drove home and I said to my wife, not one more child is spending the night in this house unless they're my children or their parents are here, or there has to be some super, how do we prevent this from happening? What are some practical steps, Sheriff, we can use to prevent this from happening in our churches?
Well, one, I would just start by being a realist and tell you that you'll never prevent it 100%, because it's very, again, like I told you, I've arrested everybody from a doctor to a law enforcement officer to just any type of person that you can imagine, that in their normal life they put on such a great face, a cloak per se, that would that you just wouldn't see it, other than it is, and it's the feeling that you had of, hey, all of this has got to stop. Like, I'm not exposing myself to the potential of an accusation, and that's what you were doing. Is I'm not putting myself in that situation. That someone who is almost unrealizing, somebody who doesn't show that they're trying to protect themselves, that doesn't recognize that, or continuously tries to put themselves in a situation that makes you uncomfortable. I would say, if you looked at that situation and said, I would not be comfortable with myself in that situation, then why are they comfortable in that situation? And there could be a legitimate reason, but it is those types of flags.
But pause.
Right. And pay attention. That's the main thing. Never excuse anything. And again, I always go back to intuition. There is just something that's innate within us, that and it's not always right. But I would tell you, when you start feeling things in your gut that something's just not right, that is the thing I would say can protect not only you but your congregation the most. Is when you just see something that just doesn't sit right, don't pass over it. And that's oftentimes what we find. We were discussing that just the other day. It's those things, those flags that show up and they're not addressed. Well, that's just, that's no big deal. Those types of things, those were the opportunities to see things. And that's what you find so often, is that we pass over the opportunities. And when something happens, we hear about this in the school shooting things. Well, after the fact, everybody talks about the red flags.
I saw.
Every single time.
Right.
Every single time.
And so it's seeing those red flags, and certainly as a pastor or some leader in a congregation, it is, when you see those red flags, never pass them by. It may be an opportunity that it can be as innocent as it can be, but take that opportunity to talk to that leader and explain to them what the potential of that could be. And it may just be visual. It may not be that but when he recognizes, or she, but more often so he, in those situations, if he recognizes those things and seems to dismiss it and move on as he was, to me, that's another red flag. That's a concern. And so it's just being mindful and paying attention, and it's tiring. It's tiring as a parent, but it's really tiring in your situation. It's tiring as being an administrator of a school, where you recognize those people have the potential to be, on your staff. It is tiring, but it's the duty that is before you, for sure.
We have to be protective of those we serve. I want to switch gears a little bit, because as we spoke the other day, we talked about the impact of these things happening to people and what it does to them over a time period. And Sheriff, let me start with you here. I don't know if you are comfortable telling any general stories of experiences you've heard of people who have just been devastated by these things. And I'd like for us to spend the next 15 minutes talking about what does healing look like. And I know, and I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor, and so everybody has to heal. The victim has to heal. The perpetrator has to heal. Everybody has to heal. But let's, I don't know if you want to share a story with us about how this affects people over the long term, and then what does healing look like? How do we start to heal?
Yeah, so I'm comfortable using the same scenario that we were talking about the other day, and that was there's this young man who, when he was 6 or 7 years old, there was a case of a teacher doing something inappropriate with him. This was 26 years ago, and of course now it's probably been another 2 years since then, but the case had happened 26 years prior, and apparently had been reported in some way, but unable to be worked in any real fashion then because of lack of evidence. We had basically the young man had decided at this point it had consumed him. He could not function in life. It was what he thought about every day. And later, it disclosed that it was always, why me? What was it about me? What was it about me?
Mm-hmm.
And so that haunted him all of that time. And it had gotten to the point 26 years later that he had gotten a weapon and was going to find this person and kill him, because that was the only thing in his mind that would let him move forward. He, recognizing that by doing that his life was about to change.
Mm-hmm.
That was still the point and 26 years later, that's where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, someone talked to him before he did that and convinced him to come talk to me. And to kind of give the story in a synopsis, we were ultimately able to make a case that long later, that amount of time later. Lots of things that happened in our favor to do that, but actually made an arrest and convicted the perpetrator of that crime 26 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would immediately think, well, he got his closure, and so he's able now to move on. Well, that has not necessarily been the case. That trauma
Mm-hmm.
has not been dealt with appropriately for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, the mindset of the victim was always that was going to be what fixed it. And it wasn't. And because it wasn't dealt with at the root, it wasn't dealt with, more in an amount of time that was closer to when he was victimized. It had all of this time to just grab hold of him and consume him to a point that it had become what he was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, certainly I think that particular scenario to me, and that was kind of why I was talking to Winston about it, was, that's probably the most pronounced and profound case that I've seen of where I have just seen how devastating, and this was a one-time event at 6 or 7 years old that changed the trajectory of this young man's life.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 30, in his 30s now, and it has completely consumed his being. And the point of our conversation at that point was to highlight the importance of actually not only working those cases the way they need to be worked so that we don't allow someone to spend 26 years of their life being consumed,
Mm-hmm.
but recognizing that regardless if it's disclosed, whether there's a case or not, there's healing that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And then the importance of, when you do find those, even that late in life, of how much more intense that healing has to be. Mm-hmm. At that point. It is one of, we've seen it affect people in several ways. I have some personal experiences with some family members, I guess you would say, that that in their adult life, their life just never seems to get together. There's always discourse, and it all is based upon abuse that happened, now 20 plus years ago. So that is why it is so important that that they don't deal with that themselves, that they have to recognize that it is going to take some intense therapy, some intense sessions with that's not something they will do on their own. And oftentimes they don't want to talk about it, but they have to talk about it, and they have to deal with it. And then the second thing is having those things available. And I will tell you again, 25, 30 years ago, those things weren't necessarily readily available, nor was the quality or the understanding of what needed to be done prevalent at that time. You had counselors, but they would be generic counselors. We didn't have a lot of trauma counselors. We didn't have a lot of specialized counselors back then that could deal with those particular individuals. And fortunately now, at least in our area, we do have those types of things. But you have to be prepared not only for those children, but those adults that you may never have a person charged with a crime on them because they don't disclose until so much later. And so you have to be willing to take care of those as well.
Let me ask you, Kamala, how does healing happen at that? So we have charged, we brought a case, how does healing happen for that person? What happens next? And we don't have a lot of time, and I want to ask Chief about the perpetrator. How do we heal them once it's out there, whatever they've done their time, come back? So I'm getting ready to ask you to go on that, but how that person, that adult who might be watching now, who it was no fault of yours why this stuff happened to you, how does that person heal or begin the journey of healing? Or
I like how you said that, begin. Healing happens in, first of all, safe and collaborative relationships. One of the things that victims lose who have been through sexual assault, who have been through trauma, is a loss of trust, a loss of safe places, that the choice has been taken away, empowerment has been taken away. The things that we don't think about that are really part of developing who we are as adults, that's what you lose. And so to regain that, I have to regain that in the context of which it was taken, which was relationship. And so when we say that, 9 out of 10 people who have experienced this are experiencing this with individuals who they know and trust and love and have relationships, that's the same place healing starts from. And that's what makes it so hard, because if I've lost that in a relationship is the last place I want to look for to find healing. But that's where it happens, because then I get to rebuild those connections. I get to rebuild those resources, those supports that help me in the different areas that trauma has impacted. Because trauma impacts us physiologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in all areas. And so I've lost choice, voice, trust in this area. That prevents me from being able to develop relationships that translate into jobs, families, friendships. And so those things are also tainted. So it becomes a very convoluted pile by the time you get to an adult stage, even if you've experienced a single event as a child, because that single event also is dependent on what was my experience of that event and what were my particular effects from that event that I took away from that might be different from what somebody else takes away from it. So it's a very complicated process. But to somebody who is listening, who has been through traumatic things, and guess what, guys? 9 out of 10 of us in this country have been. That's what the research is telling us. A lot of us have been through it. And while my trauma may not be your trauma, what I will say to you is that it starts in safe relationship. And that safe relationship could be a therapist. That safe relationship could be a safe family member. That safe relationship could be a school counselor. That safe relationship could be a number of places, but it starts there. And when you think about safety, What are the things that what are the things that indicate to you that you're safe? I can trust.
I want to highlight the clarity with what you just explained. That was probably one of the best explanations that I've probably seen of why you see such disarray in the relationships with people who have experienced trauma, is because they have no trust with other people. And so, even to the point that you made of, that's why jobs often lack, is because of lack of relationships. The clarity with what you explained, that has probably been the best way I've heard it explained. So I wanted to appreciate that.
Chief, we can't throw these people away. We can't. Every human is valuable, including perpetrators. What happens next? On mute, Chief. You're muted. You're muted, Chief.
I'll go back to what we did in Valdosta. And again, I didn't coin this idea. I saw it from a lot of forward-thinking police chiefs and sheriffs across the country. Look, you abuse a child, you need to be punished. And that's what our court system did for him. I'm not in any fashion or form suggesting it doesn't happen. But what do you do when they get out? And I think that's what everybody's asking. Is that law enforcement's responsibility to reform them? No, but to a point, not completely, but to a point, I think we all are responsible. We keep saying when you get out of prison, we're going to release you, put you on probation, the whole deal. And Camilla's talked about it all night. This is a illness. It's a problem. And it continues to get worse and worse. I agree with everything she said and everything that you all have said and the sheriff has said. But where I do think we fall apart in this country specifically is rehabilitation.
Yeah.
What do we do with these folks when they get out? Well, you're going to have to supervise them. They're going to be supervised. I mean, we tag folks with sex offenders, and I'm not against that. And I'm not against punishment. Well, I am against those putting people, and we I think we did pretty good with this in Valdosta in Lowndes County, Winston, when we had that the job fairs to support the Department of Corrections and the community. They used to call them Department of Community Supervision or Probation and Parole. So we would do these job fairs, and we would use the power of the police department. And remember, Larry Anson, our city manager, would put his power behind it too, to encourage folks to hire these folks. But when you talk about sex offenders, they're going to have medical and mental rehabilitation. Okay, and then they're going to have to be supervised to make sure that happens. As long as they're doing that, we're going to have to let them back in society. If you don't, they're going to recommit.
That's right. That's true.
It's like I tell people all the time that, and just generally across the board, and I know the sheriff knows this too, but if you get someone a job, and I'm not defending anybody that commits sexual assault against a child, it's the worst thing you can do. Okay, at least one of the worst things. But if they are released, and that's not mine, the sheriff's decision, that's really not your decision. It's really not the community's decision. It's the courts and the criminal justice system's decision. It's above our pay grade. And I hate to say it, but it's true. But if they are released, then we need, as a community, to figure out, okay, well, we may not like it, but that we need to help these folks get the treatment they need. So at least support them. The other part is get them a job. Certainly not around children.
Right.
That's prohibited. But if you don't, and you put them back in a corner and we isolate them, we keep saying in this country that if you are incarcerated and you are released, you've served your debt to society. I'm not sure we mean that. And so that's kind of the reason why we, in our community, we saw our crime rates when other jurisdictions saw them going through the roof. What do we see, Winston? They were dropping dramatically. I mean, non-existent in some of the categories. It's because you're going to have to base it off of logic and playing chess, not personal feeling and playing checkers. And that's the approach I think you have to take. Is that hold
on, Chief. Hashtag base it off of logics and playing chess, and not personal feelings and playing checkers. That was good.
That's correct. And so, the sheriff has to be a chess player. I have to be a chess player. Sometimes you got to tell people in your staff no. Sometimes you got to tell the community no. Well, they think, well, he's just being a bad sheriff. No, he's been a chess player.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we have to do it in the criminal justice system. You can't incarcerate everybody. And again, I'm not suggesting in any fashion we don't punish people that sexually assault a child. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying if they are released
Mm-hmm.
and the criminal justice system decides to release them, which is not our call, that's
Mm-hmm.
the court's call.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then we need to do things as a community to, I'm not saying embrace these folks, but make sure they're getting the help they need. And when I say community, I'm talking about the criminal justice system, the medical community, the mental health community,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't help them, it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
That's good.
I
That's
agree
good.
with that, Chief.
And you talk about supervision.
Yeah.
And if they are reformed, then they won't mind supervision because they want to be protected from reoffending. This has been a great conversation. I want for you to know, Miss Lynette Foster, you are the winner of our gift tonight. You are getting a mug, ma'am, a KW Ministries mug. We'll have to figure, well, here's how you get it. Miss Lynette Foster, all you have to do is visit
www.kwministries.net/claim your prize.
There you go. That's how you get your mug right there. Miss Lynette Foster, thank you so much, Philetta, and all those of you who watched tonight. Chief, Sheriff, I just want for you to know, I think you both know that I genuinely appreciate your friendship. I genuinely appreciate the conversations. I genuinely appreciate this conversation. My only question is, we're going for round 4.
I'm always up for
it.
Whatever you and Kamala need, and Sheriff, it's been a pleasure.
It has been
I'm
a
impressed,
pleasure.
Thank you, Chief.
It's been a pleasure for me talking to both of you. This conversation is a very underutilized conversation in our country, and I think what we did tonight was so important. So I thank you so much for being a part of this with us.
I do want to, and let me steal 30 seconds to talk to our culture, where, and I'm not sure what it's like for white families, but in our culture, it's suck it up. It's don't embarrass the family. It's what do you have to say in closing to that attitude?
Don't suck it up. Talk about it.
Embarrass the family.
Because that's the only way. And it's not just, I think that particular culture of secrecy and we keep it in the family, I think that one actually transcends just the Black community. I think we see that in a lot of different communities. And so we have to encourage a culture of speaking up. And I know it's a double-edged sword because you get the speaking up that's untruthful.
Yeah.
But I think we have to encourage talking about it.
One of the things we tell our children is there is no secrets in our house. It's one of the things we tell our children. I tell my children straight, if daddy ever touch you inappropriately, you go on the house stop and you shout it for the whole world to know. Sheriff, real quick before we go, you said this, Kamala just brought it up, but you said this, I just want for you to touch it really fast. The untruths you mentioned, when somebody lie on somebody's character is gone. That's somebody's job, possibly. That's, just real quick. How does a person deal with that? How does a person deal with that? Just real quick.
Well, the social side of it would be, an issue that's just the rumor. Someone has to deal with it. I certainly would. There's some trauma with that as well of how to deal with that, and I think they need some coaching through that. But that's why it's so important for law enforcement to. And again, I keep going back 25 years ago because I've seen it change so much and so fast. But it is as important for us to understand that if we arrest somebody and we have not done our due diligence to prove the facts versus immediately making an arrest, then it doesn't matter whether they did or didn't do it. They will wear a badge of distrust and disdain from that point forward, regardless of being exonerated in a court or whatever. It's one of those things that lingers. And so it's so important for us to do our due diligence, and we do. That's the importance of each piece of the puzzle coming together and having those available in our communities so that we don't allow that to happen.
Chief, you want to have the last word?
Other than here's an example of what he just said. It just because it's on social media and quite frankly on the news doesn't mean it's true. And if you don't believe me, remember what happened with the 1996 Olympic bombing? Mm-hmm. They blamed that gentleman and it ruined his career. That's exactly what you're talking about, Sheriff. I mean, he never recovered from it. Here's my advice for everybody. Look, you elected the man to be sheriff. Let him do his job. You want to know the facts? Let him say it. Let him say it. It's just that simple.
Listen, if it's Monday night, you're live.
With KW.
Jay's missing tonight. Peace.